Welcome. Thank you for joining me. My name is Johnny, and you're watching Saturnine Stories. Today's story takes place February 24th, 2005. At the time, popular products first introduced include Tag Body Spray, the iPod Shuffle, and water filtration device LifeStraw. Before we begin, I just want to give a bit of a warning. This is a very distressing case involving a young child. If you are easily upset, and who wouldn't be, by such a thing, I warn you in advance, please prioritize your mental health over entertainment or absorbing this kind of content. This is not an easy story to hear. Our story takes us to Homosassa, Florida. According to visitflorida.com, Homosassa, located about 75 miles north of Tampa in west central Florida, is a water lover's paradise, home of manatees, spring-fed rivers, and waterfront resorts and restaurants, as well as being home to some of the best scalloping spots in Florida. Homosassa is an ideal, family-friendly fishing and outdoor destination. And so it was in this idyllic and picturesque location that the Lunsfords, an ordinary, close-knit family, resided. Jessie Lunsford, 9 years old at the time, was the youngest member of the household, a bright, loving, sweet little girl with an infectious smile. It seemed like anyone who came into contact with her only had the best things to say about Jessie. Born October 6, 1995 in Gastonia, North Carolina, to parents Angela Bryant and Mark Lunsford. She enjoyed singing karaoke at a local restaurant, went to church regularly, loved riding her father's motorcycle with him, and had dreams of being a fashion designer, a singer, or an Olympic swimmer. Mark and Angela had divorced early on in Jessica's life, but both maintained a healthy co-parenting relationship and doted on their beautiful daughter. Eventually, Mark Lunsford wanted to be closer to his aging parents, Archie and Ruth, Jessie's grandparents. And so he proposed they move to Homosassa to live with them, a proposition that Jessica happily accepted. The Lunsfords seemed to have a beautiful life in a full house, with elderly grandparents Archie and Ruth, Jessie and her doting father Mark, and the family pet, a Dachshund named Corky. To a young child, a cherished stuffed animal or other toy represents safety, security, and companionship. They feel less afraid, less alone. In the darkness of their room at night, the terrors of the unknown, the monsters in the closet or under the bed, don't seem quite as scary with their soft plush protector wrapped in their arms. I have a daughter who's about to be the same age as Jessie was at the time of her story, and this is her current favorite toy, a stuffed teddy bear named Cotton Candy Face, because the fur is permanently scented like cotton candy. She sleeps with it almost every night. Jessie's favorite toy at the time of this case was a large purple stuffed dolphin her father had recently won for her at the county fair. She slept with it almost every night, and it reminded her of the safety and security of her dad when he was gone or sleeping in his own bed. This purple stuffed dolphin will sadly play a critical role in this story. On the evening of February 23, 2005, Mark Lunsford was working as a dump truck operator, and Jessie was at church with family friend Sharon Armstrong, who took Jessie to church with her every Wednesday night. Jessie was training with other members of a youth group for an upcoming competition in which they would be competing against one another, reciting Bible verses from memory. Sharon Armstrong dropped Jessie off at home with her grandmother Ruth. While she waited excitedly for her father to get home, she neatly folded her school clothes and set them out for the next morning. Eventually, Mark made it home and wanted to relax on the couch and watch TV with Jessie, as she burned off her energy by playfully jumping on the sofa next to him. After a while, Mark gave Jessie a hug and a kiss and left to spend the night with his then-girlfriend, leaving Ruth to lovingly tuck in her granddaughter, as she did most nights. She tucked Jessie in as she snuggled up to her purple stuffed dolphin and kissed her goodnight, turning out the lights and retiring to her own bed. In the stillness and calm of that seemingly ordinary and peaceful night, no one could have possibly known the unspeakable nightmare that was about to visit their loving home and disrupt their lives forevermore. It was at approximately 5:45 a.m. the following morning that Mark Lunsford returned home to prepare for work. His alarm started blaring, and he quickly shut it off as he continued his morning routine. It only took a moment or two to notice that Jessie's alarm was still sounding, a fact that he found odd as she usually awoke and excitedly got ready for her day alongside him. His puzzlement grew to full-on concern when several minutes passed and her alarm had still not been silenced. Mark ventured to Jessie's room, hoping she had simply overslept. As he opened her door and his eyes scanned the room, taking stock of the situation, sheer terror gripped him as every parent's worst nightmare became a reality. Jessie's school clothes were neatly laid out, nothing seemed to have been disturbed, but beautiful little Jessica Marie Lunsford was gone, along with her purple dolphin. Panic immediately surged through the household, with Mark frantically searching for any sign of his daughter and Ruth calling 911. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary other than being unable to locate Jessie, but the horror only amplified tenfold when Mark reached the rear screen door of the house and quickly noted a 6 by 6 inch L-shaped cut in the screen. The first officer to arrive at the Lunsford home was Deputy Juan Santiago. He questioned the Lunsfords about all they might know regarding Jessie's whereabouts and last known movements. At 4 years old, both ironically and luckily, Jessica had participated in a child protection ID program at a Florida mall, during which she made a fingerprint chart. These fingerprints were given to Officer Santiago by Ruth to aid in the search. In the first of many infuriating failures, Officer Juan Santiago did not at the time conduct a door-to-door search of the neighborhood. More police arrived throughout the day, processing the home and locating the 6 by 6 L-shaped cut in the screen door. Before too long, a full-scale investigation was launched, including dive teams, helicopters, and canine units, as well as authorities searching all local bodies of water and surrounding forests. It is a well-known fact that when a child goes missing, the first suspects are the parents and other immediate family, then expanding outward to those who knew them, and then finally to strangers. So it was no surprise to anyone when police questioned Mark and Archie Lunsford about Jessica's disappearance. That is both to be expected and understandable, but this normal protocol quickly turned into tunnel vision, with the authorities only focusing on Mark and Archie and no one else, questioning them both aggressively for hours on end. Jessica's grandfather, Archie, seemed to get the brunt of it, at one point attempting to leave as he grew tired of their aggressive interrogation tactics and refusal to believe his denials. As he stood up to leave, he was shoved against the wall and had his arms roughly pinned behind his back as handcuffs were slapped on him. This tunnel vision wasted valuable time and clouded police judgment when they should have been focusing on a wider area of interest. This could have been done at the same time as their questioning of the Lunsford family, but it was not. After coming up empty with their search of bodies of water and forests and the questioning of Archie and Mark, police finally began to explore other avenues, which started with looking into all registered offenders in the area. They questioned each offender they could and still came up with nothing, until they realized that one particular registered offender was unable to be located. And now it is my displeasure to introduce to you this walking bag of shit, John Evander Cooey, 46 years old at the time of our story, and a registered offender and lifelong criminal. John Cooey was born prematurely on September 19, 1958, to a 15-year-old mother and a 21-year-old father. This sordid detail alone shows us that the rotten apple may not have fallen far from the twisted family tree. So there we have the clues to the nature, but the nurture, or complete lack thereof, was no better. Violently mistreated and even essayed by relatives and completely neglected by his mother, malnourished and left without the basic care needed of any young child, his home life was a living, breathing nightmare. As is often the case for mistreated children, school was no refuge for the young boy, and he was viciously bullied for his short stature, deformed ears, and his low IQ and learning disability, as well as a speech impediment. This required him to attend special education classes. It was around the age of 8 years old that Cooey began to behave inappropriately with young girls around him, friends and family alike, subjecting them to the same attempts at SA that he himself had been through. I should note that it started at 8 years old that we know of. It is very likely, in my opinion, that it probably started much earlier than when it started to come to light. Along with this extremely alarming and inappropriate behavior, Cooey began to experiment with and abuse inhalants such as glue and gasoline, which did absolutely no favors to the state of his deranged young mind. Things for an 8-year-old John Cooey reached a boiling point at home with his substance abuse and predatory behavior. His mother's neglect was also at an all-time high, and he was sent away to live with his aunt and an 11-year-old cousin, Linda Arnett. Linda's mother immediately took Cooey under her wing and tried very hard to provide him the life he'd always been deprived of. She booked a surgery appointment to correct his deformed ears, enrolled him in speech therapy classes and mental health treatment for his disturbing interest in young girls. His aunt seemed to be the only adult in his life who genuinely cared about him and wanted to give him a good life. How did he repay her for this kindness? The young boy was caught trying to SA her very young daughter, Cooey's own cousin, Linda Arnett, as she slept. Thankfully, in the struggle, her mother awoke and confronted John. Unfortunately, her kind nature meant that she chose not to report Cooey to the authorities, but she did expel him immediately from the home, and both she and Linda cut off all contact with him from that point forward. He was sent to live with other relatives, burning bridge after bridge until no one would take him in, leaving John Evander Cooey completely on his own at the age of 16. To cope with this rough and lonesome lifestyle, his earlier experimentation with inhalants devolved into alcoholism and hard drug use, addictions which he would carry with him in extreme fashion for the remainder of his life as a free man. Predictably, his dark urges and destructive behavior increasingly worsened as he aged. Throughout the course of his life, Cooey racked up over 24 arrests for burglary, illegally carrying a concealed weapon, having his driver's license practically permanently revoked for multiple DUIs, public intoxication, drug use, and very obviously, repeated attempts at SA of minors and indecent exposure. It was in 1978 that his inappropriate actions with children were finally reported to police for the first time, when he attempted to burglarize a home and found a young girl sleeping inside. She awoke to Cooey attempting to kiss her. Noticing that she was awake, he put his hand over her mouth, ordering her to remain silent. She struggled and managed to escape, alerting her parents, and John Cooey was quickly apprehended. For this, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Frustratingly, he ultimately only served 2 years before being paroled and went right back to his ways. In 1991, he approached a 5-year-old girl playing in her backyard and talked her into sitting on his lap. Her mother luckily came out right as he was beginning to expose himself, and he ran away. Rather surprisingly, eventually Cooey managed to hold down a steady job and even got married. But disturbingly, his wife had a young daughter from a previous relationship, and I think you know exactly where this is going. His wife eventually caught him in the middle of the night, attempting to SA her young daughter, and astonishingly, she agreed not to report this to authorities, provided he vacate the home and grant her an uncontested divorce, conditions which Cooey readily agreed to so that he could avoid a violation of his registered offender status and escape more prison time. From 1992 to 1994, John Cooey worked as a dishwasher at Emily's Family Restaurant, which, in a bit of dark irony, was located only 1 mile away from the future home of Jessica Lunsford and the site of the ultimate culmination of his life of crime. While employed at the restaurant, it was discovered after complaints were made that he was infatuated with a 14 to 15-year-old female employee at the establishment and would repeatedly give her love letters, despite being in his mid to late 30s at the time. This, thankfully, led to his termination from the dishwashing position. So it was, in 2005, after many years of homelessness, drug use, alcoholism, and inappropriate behavior with young girls, that John Evander Cooey found himself living at a trailer owned by his sister, Dorothy Dixon, in Snowbird Court, located in Homosassa, Florida, a mere 60 yards from the home of little Jessie Lunsford. One infuriating detail that delayed police zeroing in on Cooey more quickly is that registered offenders are required by law to provide a current address in which they reside and are not allowed to move houses without notifying authorities of their new location. Cooey, obviously not one to follow the law, had left the home of his wife after the incident and moved in with his sister without notifying anyone of his change of residence. Thus, the authorities were completely unaware that there was an offender living in the area. Frustratingly, it was not a quick series of events that led police to tracking down John Cooey. Just like every other area of this case, authorities dragged their collective feet and made numerous mistakes. Jessie went missing on February 24th, and it took police until March 12th to track him down. When authorities finally stopped focusing on Archie and Mark Lunsford and began to expand the scope of their investigation, coming to the realization that one registered offender could not be located, they questioned Dorothy Dixon, his sister. Her trailer, which as I previously mentioned was only 60 yards from the Lunsford home, was inhabited by Dixon, her daughter Maddie Secord, Maddie's husband Gene Secord, who looks suspiciously like an old Japanese man, Dorothy's boyfriend Matt Dittrich, and the 2-year-old son of Maddie and Gene. All of the adults in the trailer steadfastly denied ever having seen Cooey, much less lived with him. Eventually, after repeated visits to the trailer and attempts to get the family to break, Dorothy admitted that John Cooey had been living with her and revealed that on March 4th, following Jessica Lunsford's disappearance, Maddie Secord had purchased a bus ticket for Cooey so he could flee to Savannah, Georgia, as the heavy police presence in the area was making him nervous due to absconding from his registered address. At least he told them that was the reason. With John Cooey, you can tell he's lying because his lips are moving, and his family was apparently no different. Dorothy Dixon and Maddie Secord were both later arrested on March 19th for misleading investigators as to their knowledge of Cooey's whereabouts. When police finally tracked down and questioned John Evander Cooey on March 12th in Savannah, Georgia, he denied that he had anything to do with Jessica's disappearance, saying he, quote, was not in the habit of snatching up kids, end quote. He first claimed he had never laid eyes on Jessie and had only been to his sister's trailer once looking for trailer parts. Then he changed his story and said he'd been living at the trailer and watched Jessica playing in her yard and estimated her age to be 6 years old, which is revolting, as that means Cooey thought Jessica was even younger than her actual age by 3 years. Even after admitting he watched her and had illegally lived 60 yards from her home, Cooey continued to deny having anything to do with her disappearance. He was questioned again after this, continuing to deny any involvement. Even though police were sure they had their man, they had to cut the freak loose. On March 14th, Savannah police were unable to locate Cooey when they attempted to question him again, but luckily he was picked up in Augusta, Georgia on a warrant out of Citrus County. It is unknown to me why Savannah police couldn't have held Cooey for the very same warrant, but for whatever reason, they did not or could not. When police began to question him again, he demanded a lawyer. The officers questioning him ignored his demands for legal counsel, which was another mistake to add to the rapidly growing list. As police ignored his Miranda rights and continued to question John Cooey, he eventually broke and revealed that Jessica was no longer alive. The same day Cooey was questioned for the third time, on March 14th, investigators quickly began processing Cooey's room and Dorothy Dixon's trailer. Evidence listed as being collected from Cooey's home include a red-stained mattress, a red-stained green pillow, a red-stained blue pillow, and a red-stained pair of jeans found on the floor, a shirt from the closet, and a briefcase containing a letter, though I was unable to find the contents of this letter through my research, but it must have been something of evidentiary value for them to collect it along with the other items. Police also noted a ladder and shovel placed just under Cooey's bedroom window, and a length of speaker wire running up the roof for a makeshift cable antenna, two things that Dorothy Dixon claimed to be completely unaware of. Cooey eventually revealed the location of Jessica's body, and on March 18th, the investigators began to process the area immediately outside of the trailer for, quote, possible recovery of Jessica Lunsford. Locating a disturbed patch of earth near or under the back porch, they began the excavation process and recovery, which took 5 hours, from late night on March 18th to the early hours of March 19th. Sadly, police recovered Jessica's remains inside 2 large black trash bags buried just outside the trailer. We will come back to the distressing details of what they found, but I urge you to brace yourself. Initially, Cooey claimed he had no intention of abducting Jessica and that he only broke into the Lunsford home to burglarize it. But when he saw her, he acted on impulse and took her. This is the same excuse he'd used earlier in his criminal career when he attempted to S.A. a sleeping young girl and was caught, just like the cowardly act of attacking sleeping young girls, claiming he was only there for a burglary seems to be part and parcel of his M.O. After repeated questioning, bit by bit, confession by confession, the whole sickening story began to come together. John Evander Cooey had been watching Jessica for some time, fantasizing about her as she played outside and went to and from school. On February 23rd, he could hold back his sinister urges no longer. Cooey had been out with his sister, as well as her boyfriend Matt Dittrich, in the late hours of the night, sharing hard narcotics and helping a friend charge their car battery. They returned home at 1 a.m., February 24th, and shared more hard narcotics before Dixon and Dittrich retired to their room, locking the door and turning the TV up full blast, which they claimed was their usual routine. Dorothy Dixon later denied ever hearing or seeing anyone exit or enter the home that night. Cooey paced around, left to his own devices and pondering his fantasies, and finally decided to act. He opened his bedroom window and crept out into the night and over to the Lunsford home, where the family was sleeping blissfully. With a blade, John Cooey slit the screen of the rear patio door, silently letting himself in and creeping to Jessica's room. He opened the door with his heart pounding, hyper-aware of any and all noises which may spoil his plans and get him caught. But there were none. With a silent sigh of relief, he entered her room and closed the door behind him, gently waking the sleeping little girl. Groggy and confused from her slumber, Jessie asked who he was and what he was doing in her room. Ever the liar, Cooey told her he was a friend of her father's and was there to take her to him. The trusting little girl arose to follow him, asking if she could take along a stuffed animal. She held her beloved stuffed dolphin in her tiny arms, and Cooey carried her into the night and over to his trailer. Her captor instructed her to climb up the ladder and into his bedroom window. She did as she was told, and he crept in after her, closing the window behind him, leaving the two in total darkness. Immediately after this, Cooey warned the little girl to keep silent and acted out his sickening fantasies on the bed, before stuffing her into the closet where she would be kept during her captivity. Threatened to keep silent, with the television up loud, playing news coverage of investigators trying to locate Jessie, as well as tearful pleas from her parents begging her for her to come home. As I'm sure was Cooey's sadistic intention, this news coverage was her constant soundtrack throughout her captivity. The next morning, John Cooey took her from the closet and S.A.'d her again, before locking her back up and going about his day. This was the routine for 3 long and horrifying days. On the 3rd night, Cooey was absolutely terrified he would be discovered, and decided in a panic that he had to get rid of Jessica. He removed her from the closet and bound her hands, helping her through the window and down the ladder, telling her it was time to take her back to her father. In his last cold lie to Jessica Lunsford, he told her he didn't want anyone to see her crossing the street, so he had to put trash bags over her to mask her identity. She stepped into one bag held by Cooey, and he pulled it up to her waist. From the top down, he pulled the second bag over her and knotted the 2 trash bags together. He picked her up and laid her down in a shallow grave he had dug before he even abducted her, showing he may have also been lying about needing to get rid of her in a panic. No, he had planned this all along. Still alive and no doubt reeling with sheer terror, Cooey began to cover her with dirt. When he was done, he scattered leaves and twigs over the burial site and went to sleep. According to some sources, he also placed the back patio steps over the hole. The next day, Dorothy Dixon claimed to be surprised by police presence in the area. Cooey continued to live in the trailer as if nothing had happened until March 4th, when, at his request, Dorothy Dixon and Maddie Secord gave Cooey $200 for bus fare to Savannah, Georgia, so they could help him flee, and dropped him off at the bus station. Upon processing the scene, as well as Jessica's body, they found her just as Cooey had left her, wrapped in 2 trash bags in the ground. Her wrists were bound with speaker wire, and in her arms she was still clutching her purple stuffed dolphin tightly. The speaker wire was later matched to the crude cable antenna Cooey had fashioned in his bedroom, and the trash bags were matched to a box on top of the refrigerator. The red stains on the bedding were matched to both Jessica and John Cooey, and her fingerprints were all over the closet and a broken table that was also inside. In one of the most heartbreaking details of the case that always sticks with me, 2 of Jessie's skeletonized fingers were found to be poking through the trash bags. The fingers outside the bag decomposed far more quickly than the rest of the body within. Jessica was still alive when she was buried, and experts estimated that in such conditions she would have had, at best, 1 to 3 minutes of oxygen and would have lost consciousness in 1.5 minutes. Her stomach contents were non-existent, meaning she hadn't eaten during the entirety of her 3 days of captivity. Another lie by Cooey is that he claimed to have fed her a hamburger during her time in the closet when he undeniably fed her nothing. While Cooey was being held in county jail awaiting trial, Gene Secord was in the cell next to him on drug charges. He recounted that Cooey was constantly praying and talking about God. He asked Cooey, "If you believe in God so much, how could you do what you did?" To which Cooey replied, "That's in the past. I can't live in the past." At one point, John Cooey claimed to be highly offended when he overheard jail guards talking, and one said that she was afraid to leave her child in daycare because of people like him. He defensively shouted, "I don't appreciate people talking about me like this. I didn't mean to do what I did, and I didn't mean to harm her." He claimed his only and biggest regret was, quote, "losing everything." Typical of someone like Cooey to regret nothing but that which directly affects himself. Thankfully, though, John Evander Cooey's reign of terror was finally at an end, and no more children would ever fall victim to his urges, as the only 2 outcomes for the charges such as his were life in prison or capital punishment. During the trial, John Cooey was completely uninterested in the proceedings, instead choosing to spend the whole time doodling and coloring, as if he didn't have a care in the world. His defense ordered a PET scan on his brain, and the results show asymmetry in the frontal lobe and decreases in the very base of the brain. People with abnormalities to the brain, such as his, are often shown to have a profound inability to change their ability to regulate or control their behavior. His PET scan showed indications of psychosis, and the results of his scan are indicative of one with poor impulse control and indicate a propensity toward aggression in general. They claim this was likely due to his premature birth, a history of head trauma, abusing inhalants, heavy narcotics, and alcohol, as well as his mother, quote, "not providing him the proper nourishment as a child." However, in 2006, as part of the ongoing trial, a Dr. Eric Cotton conducted a second PET scan independent of the defense and found absolutely no abnormalities or anomalies, and wholeheartedly disagreed with the results of the original scan ordered by the defense team. The defense also focused heavily on arguments that Cooey could not be held responsible for his actions because of his extremely low IQ, and argued that he met the requirements for diminished responsibility due to severe cognitive impairment. But this was thrown out as Cooey's IQ of 70 was higher than the minimum required of such a ruling. Victim impact statements were read by family and friends alike, as well as teachers from Jessie's school classes. Ultimately, John Cooey was sentenced to capital punishment, but remained just as unbothered, unmoved, as when it came to his reaction to the verdict. As it would turn out, Cooey had one last trick up his sleeve, and this may serve to partially explain his lack of care for his punishment. John Cooey was terminally ill, a fact that, according to one source, was unknown even to his defense team. John Cooey passed away, quite fittingly, of rectal cancer on September 30th, 2009, and I don't think I'm alone in saying that the entire process of his terminal illness was hopefully as excruciatingly painful and miserable as possible. The sheriff at the time went on record to say he was not saddened by Cooey's passing, and his only wish is that he could have been there to watch him take his last breath. At several points throughout this video, I alluded to the numerous mistakes that were made by authorities during the investigation. Before I list them, I just want to note that I'm generally supportive of law enforcement as a whole, but when there is poor police work, I'm not going to hold my tongue. There are some fine, brave men and women out there in the law enforcement, and there are also just as many who are not fit to wear a badge. One of the first mistakes made by authorities is the fact that they didn't even notice a registered offender was not at his registered address well before the crime took place. Then they only focused on Archie and Mark Lunsford with tunnel vision, allowing the real culprit to commit further atrocities and breathe free air much longer than he rightfully should have. Typically, police will set up a command center for a missing persons case far away from the child's home so the parents don't have to see it every day. But not only did investigators set up the command center within eyesight of the home, they set up the command center right out front of the Lunsford home. In the first couple of days after their search for Jessica, police went to Dorothy Dixon's trailer and spoke to Maddie Secord, and she gave police permission to search the home, but they declined, only searching around the outside. While police were speaking to Maddie at the front door, Cooey was inside and stepped out onto the back porch to hide. Cadaver dogs alerted on Cooey's trailer several times, even while Jessica was still alive and in the closet, but they did not pay attention or go inside. Investigators had every opportunity to save Jessica's life and to apprehend Cooey much sooner, but they simply did not do so. You may be wondering how John Cooey could have abducted and held captive a terrified 9-year-old girl in a tiny trailer full of people, and none of them were aware of what was going on. Initially, John Cooey denied anyone else had been aware of what he had done, but this was yet another lie. Dorothy Dixon even interacted with Jessica and helped Cooey flee on the bus right after this. At one point, Matt Dittrich sat or laid on Cooey's red-stained bed and watched television while Jessie was in the closet, and Maddie Secord is also thought to have known of Jessica's presence. This is only my opinion, but I would find it extremely hard to believe that Gene Secord was the only one who didn't have a clue. The world started failing Jessica Lunsford years before she was ever born. From Cooey's mother neglecting and abusing him, to all the judges who gave him a mere slap on the wrist for his countless crimes, to the parole board who let him out of prison after 2 years and onward. Jessica Marie Lunsford was by all accounts a beautiful and special person. Not even John Cooey can take away the rays of sunshine she showered upon her loving father and all those she came in contact with, and her beautiful memory will live on in their hearts forever. To end this video on a lighter note, I want to share a few words about Mark Lunsford. I don't know if I could ever gather the strength to keep going if I lost my children, especially in such a horrific manner, but Mark is made of tougher stuff, and not only kept going but found reasons to smile. He made a mission out of his daughter's memory, and along with lawmakers created the Jessica Lunsford Act, which seeks to toughen the sentences of registered offenders to prevent them from obtaining early release or plea bargaining their way to lesser sentences. I'd just like to say, Mark, if you're out there, I respect you greatly, and I think you're a shining example of a real father and a total badass. There's a 2011 documentary called Jessie's Dad, which chronicles Mark's mission, traveling from state to state and lobbying for the Jessica Lunsford Act. I would encourage you to watch it, as the footage is both powerful and moving. At the time of this video, the documentary is currently free on TubiTV. A link to the documentary can be found in the description below. My heart goes out to Mark Lunsford as well as his whole family, and especially to the memory of Jessica Marie Lunsford. I hope you're in a happier place now where no one can ever hurt you again. And now, as I bring this story to a close, I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for watching. I know this was not an easy or pleasant story to listen to, but I find Jessie's story to be an important one, as it not only helps keep her memory alive, stories such as hers can hopefully prevent more crimes such as this from happening in the future, perhaps by causing someone to think about their actions before destroying someone else's life, or perhaps if enough people are outraged by things like this, they can sway their local lawmakers into being tougher on offenders like John Cooey. I urge you to hug your little ones extra tight tonight as you tuck them into bed and show them all the love you have to give. Given the distressing nature of this story, I'm probably going to take a break from covering children for a little while. I can't say the next story will be lighthearted given the nature of my channel, but it won't involve a child. Stay tuned for more. My name is Johnny Saturnine, and you've been watching Saturnine Stories. Good night.